Alright, so first of all, what's a scene? In Godot, the scene is whatever node exists as a child of root when you execute your game. In our case, when we execute our game, main scene becomes the child of root and is thus the scene. The other scenes or classes you might have created, as long as they don't exist in this node tree, do not exist in your game currently. Changing scenes involves destroying that child and replacing it with another. But here's the catch. If you destroy your current scene node, what node will be in charge of loading the new scene? Your root node is now empty, so nothing can happen, right? Well, that is not exactly true. Godot can actually do this for you. Calling getTree and change scene to file from the main scene will replace it with the one that the path leads to. But then you're leaving it up to the engine to do the work for you, and you won't be sure what's going on while this is happening. So what if you want to have a bit more control? In Godot, as you can tell, there are moments where you want some nodes or classes to exist within your game as a floating entity no matter what happens, like an audio manager or a save system, or in our case, a scene manager. These are things you want to be able to use no matter what's happening in your game, no matter what scene is currently active as your main scene, and in these cases, you would define this node or class as an autoload. An autoload will be created as soon as your game is executed and live alongside your main scene. It is therefore always accessible, and you can use it to perform some actions, such as saving your game or changing the scene. This is how you generally proceed in order to change scenes in Godot. An external entity somewhere will take care of these operations, something you could call a scene manager. The scene manager is created as an autoload, so it always exists as a child of your root node and can take care of replacing the main scene for you when it is needed. Now, calling getTree change scene to file is certainly one way to do so, but like I said, it doesn't give you a lot of control. If you want to have more control, you can do this. You can then introduce loading screens, transitions, or anything you'd like before the new scene comes into play. The downside is that doing it this way is more complex. It requires careful management of scene lifecycle. For the most part, especially if you're starting out with Godot, I would stick to the change scene to file method. Say you are in scene A and you call change scene to file from scene A or from your scene manager autoload and specify the path of scene B. That's how you change, plain and simple. A scene manager is generally considered good practice because separation of concerns is important for your code. It's better to have one dedicated node in charge of changing scenes, rather than using change scene to file in every scene file you have. It will help you keep the flow of your game consistent and clean. However, as you may have understood by now, changing scenes removes the whole node tree and replaces it with another, autoload aside. It's a clean sweep. You're destroying everything and replacing it with a new scene. That makes sense when you're switching from the menu scene to the actual race scene in Mario Kart, for example, because everything is different. But think about it. Do you really need to do this for a visual novel? What actually changes when you change scenes? The background image and, well, that's pretty much it, right? You move location, so the display has to be different, and maybe the music. But structurally in your scene, you would still have a texture rect for your background, and the only thing you need to do is replace its image with another. The rest is similar. The dialogue UI is unchanged, the character sprite fulfills the same role, etc. The nodes you've created to handle a dialogue do not need to be destroyed at all. And that is why in a visual novel, your scene, and when I say scene I mean node tree, does not need to change. You just need to change the resources that your nodes are using the same way that the character sprite would change sprites depending on who's talking in your dialogue. That is the good thing about visual novels. Their UI is very consistent across scenes, so you don't actually need to destroy and load new elements that often. You can just keep reusing the same ones and fake the scene change by fading the current scene to black for a moment. This is what we will be doing in this tutorial. We will do a fake scene change to transition from the first scene to the second scene of our story. However, because I know people would prefer the classic way to change scenes in Godot, I will also show you how to do this by quickly creating a title screen for a game and transitioning from this scene to the main dialogue scene. In that scenario, we will actually go ahead and replace the child node of the root node, and it makes more sense to do it here because the title screen, structurally, has nothing to do with the dialogue scene. It has different elements, different buttons, etc. We will create a scene manager autoload that will do both, a hard transition from title screen to the main scene and a soft transition from the first dialogue to the second one. Alright, welcome to part 6. I'm going to try and go a little bit faster this time because we have a lot to cover and I would rather this video doesn't take an hour long. I think part 4 already was quite long, and part 5, I'm not sure because I didn't edit it yet, but I think part 5 is also turning out to be quite long. So I'm going to try and keep this one as short as I can, but yeah, there's a lot to cover. So first thing we're going to do is open our script. We have, at this point, you should have two different scripts. You should have the first scene script and you should have the second scene script. On both of them, make sure that at the end you have a line specifying the name of the next scene, which should be the same file name as your second scene. So if it's called second scene.json, you call this second scene. If this is called third scene.json, you call this third scene. And specify a name for the transition, which is going to be the visual effect we apply when transitioning scenes. This doesn't make too much sense now, but it's going to make sense very soon. For the second scene, you can specify just an empty string for the next scene because we don't have anything after this, and fade for the transition name. We will have two transitions, but for now, let's just keep it to fade. All right, that will be it for the scripts. We are going to go ahead and create a new file inside of the script folder. I'm going to do right click, create new script, and we're going to call this SceneManager. All right, now go ahead and open it. Instead of extending Node 2D, we're going to extend Node 2D. You can consider this SceneManager a hidden scene of our 2D game that will only intervene when it's necessary. All right, so let me show you first in the editor what we're going to do in this file. There's no need to do the same thing as me here. I'm just going to illustrate what our code is going to do. So as I explained before, the goal of the SceneManager is to create a transition between two scenes. And in order to do that, it will signal to the main scene, so this scene here, when is the appropriate time to drop the current script of the first scene, and when it should load the script of the next scene. The SceneManager will also create the visual effect that happens when we transition. And if you're asking what visual effect, we will have two different ones. We're going to fade out. We're going to have a fade out and a fade in animation. And we're also going to have a slide in and a slide out animation. So let me show you directly on the editor. I'm going to right click here and I'm going to add a child node. I'm going to add a canvas layer. And inside of this, I'm going to add a color rect. So this color rect will simply be a black rectangle. I'm going to change that right now. There we go. And I'm also going to do full rect so that it covers the whole screen. So for the fade in and fade out animation, very simply, we're going to be messing with the visibility value. So we see we have modulate here, and modulate has this A value. And we're going to go from 0 to actually 1 here. We're going to use the raw value to go from 0 to 1 to do fade in and fade out animation. And for the slide in, slide out, even simpler, we're just going to change the position of the X value. So if you see, if I change the X like this, you can see the black screen like slowly slide out of our screen. So what we're going to do is have this black rectangle come from the right, stop here to hide the scene, and then leave to the left. And that's going to be our second animation. So here we go. Two very simple animations that we will create using Godot's twins. If you've never used them, you'll see it's very simple. And one last thing, the canvas layer that I have created in reality won't be in the main scene like this. It cannot be because this main scene node won't exist at the start of our game. At the start, we will be on a different node, a title screen, if you will, that we will create later in this tutorial. So the point is that the canvas layer cannot be here because it needs to exist at all times when our game is active. That's why it will be created by the SceneManager, which is an autoload, and an autoload always exists inside of your game. So let me delete this. I'm going to go back to my script. There we go. So as I said, SceneManager needs to be an autoload. So let's just go ahead and do this now. You're going to want to open the project settings here, and you're going to want to go to globals, and you see you have the autoload tab here. You're going to go ahead and add the path to the SceneManager. I'm going to click on add. Make sure this is enabled and close it. And that's pretty much all you have to do for this SceneManager to be an autoload. So what that means is that it's going to be available everywhere in your code. As you can see, if I go to main scene, for example, don't have to do this. If I type SceneManager, it's recognized by my code, okay? All right. go back to SceneManager. As I've showcased in the editor earlier, this SceneManager will create a canvas layer with a color rect inside for the transitional effect. So let's go ahead and create some variables for that. I'm going to add a little comment that says black color rect for transition animations. I'm going to create a variable called transition layer. This is of type canvas layer. And I'm going to add something called transition rect, which is a color rect. I'm also going to add a transition time value, which is a float, which by default will be equal to 0.5. So this is the time that the animation will take. You'll be able to modify this value as you wish later on, but for now I'm just going to put 0.5, which is half a second. So half a second for the fade in, half a second for the fade out, and same for the sliding animations. Now, in the ready method, we're going to create the canvas layer and the color rect the same way I did earlier in the editor. So function ready. We're going to do transition layer equal canvas layer new. So as soon as the SceneManager is ready inside of our game, we're creating a new canvas layer. We're going to do transition layer equal 100. We're doing this because we want to make sure that this canvas layer is above everything else in our game, to make sure that the color rect inside of it will cover everything. Transition rect needs to be created as well, the same way with color rect.new. And as I've said earlier, it needs to be completely blacked, and you can do this very easily by changing the color value to black. You can do this by using color.black. So Godot has predefined color for everything. If you tap the name color, you should have the name of all the colors that exist inside of the editor here. So what we want for us is black. Now we're going to make the color rect fill its parent, which is the canvas layer, which fills the viewport. This is how we can have the color rect fill the entirety of our screen. And the way for us to do this, it's very easy. We can play with the anchor values. So transition rect has anchor bottom, left, right, and top, right? So the position of your color rect is actually defined by the top right value, and it will go up until it will go where the bottom left tells it to go. So this will define how big the color rect is. I can actually show you very quickly in the editor. Before that, let me go back here. I'm going to do the same thing and create the canvas layer again with a color rect that is black, and you can see inside of layout we have the anchor preset here. I'm going to do custom, so I'm able to change them myself. And top right, actually top left, sorry, I was wrong. Top left defines the position of your color rect, which is when it starts. So as you can see, if I change this, it's going to change the position of the color rect. And if you want to change how big it is, you can simply do right equal actually 1. 1 is enough to fill everything, and bottom to 1 as well, and you can see that it covers everything. So this is what we are going to do in our script. Let me delete this. Back to my script. Color rect that anchor right will be 1, and same for anchor bottom, also going to be 1. This is how we make sure that the color rect fills the entirety of the screen. Now we're going to hide it for now and add it in the scene later on. We only want to display this when we are actually transitioning scenes. So in order to hide it, you're going to change the visible property that it has and simply put this to false, because this is a boolean. As I did in the editor, you're going to add your color rect as a child of the transition layer, just like this. And the last thing we need to do is to add the transition layer itself to the scene. Now the transition layer, because it is, you know, the scene manager is an autoload, it doesn't really have a parent. So in this case, the parent actually becomes the root node. And to access the root node, you can do get tree.root. And this is where you want to add your child. Add child and transition layer. So after you do this, transition layer exists in your game at all times, but it will be invisible at first because the color rect is not visible. All right. Now we are going to create the animations that we need for our transitions. I'm going to create one function called transition out with the name of the visual transition as an input. This is going to be a string, of course, and by default we can simply put fade. As I said earlier, we're going to be supporting two different kinds of animations. So here you just want to check what animation has been specified in the name. So you're going to do match, and if this is fade, you want to call a function called fade in, which we haven't created yet, but we will do very soon. And actually, you want to call this fade out for consistency of the name. My bad. And if it's slide, obviously you want to call this slide out. So those two don't exist yet, but don't worry about it. And when you do a match, it's always good to also handle the default case in case the name of the effect is not something that you have that you are expecting. You can handle everything else by doing this, and in this case, you can simply call fade out as well. We're going to quickly create another function called transition in that will be virtually the same thing, but it's going to be for the fading in animation. So again, effect string, and by default fade. Match the effect. I'm just going to actually copy past all this. And you just want to change the name here. Fade out to fade in, slide out to slide in, and again, fade out to fade in. So the underscore here means that these functions are to be considered private, and only the scene manager should call them directly. So we're going to start by implementing the first one, which is fade out. Inside of fade out, the first thing you want to do is to make sure that the color rect is positioned in the top right corner of your screen. Like it should be the top left, sorry. Keep making the same mistake. Transition rect, position, and you can simply do vector 2.0, which will put 0 to both the x and the y value of the position. You want to do this because we will also introduce sliding animations, which will displace this element. So you always want to reset its position before the fade in and out animation. Something else we want to make sure of is that currently it is completely transparent because the color rect is supposed to get darker and darker as you transition. So we can do this by setting the modulate.a value to 0, as I've showed you in the editor a little bit earlier. Another thing you want to do is that the color rect is on top of everything else in your scene. Just a failsafe, just making sure that everything works accordingly. We're going to put the Z index to a very high number to make sure that it's above everything. So now that we've prepared everything, we can finally put visible back to true. And now we can start animating. So in order to animate, we are going to create a tween to define the actual animation. So how do we do this? We're going to do tween equal, obviously, create tween and not new tween or tween. We have a function to create one. So in this case, we want to animate a property. And to be specific, we want to quote-unquote animate the property modulate.a so that it goes from 0, which is transparent, to 1, which means fully visible. And that will make the screen entirely black at that stage. So tween has the method tween property, which allows us to do just that very easily. And you can call it by doing tween.tween property. The first thing you want to specify here, and you can see it on my screen, is the object. So this is the node that has the property that you want to animate, and this node is transition rect. Then you want to specify the name of the property that you want to animate, and this is modulate.a. Next, you want to specify the target value. Which value is modulate A supposed to have at the end of your animation? And like I said a little bit earlier, it's supposed to have the value 1. The last thing you want to specify is how much time it will take for the tween to animate your property from 0 to 1. And we have a variable for this that we have prepared earlier called transition time. And that's it. So is that actually it though? Obviously not, because animating a property is all good and fine, but we need to actually know in our code when this animation is done playing, because this is when we can safely go ahead and change scenes without the player seeing what's going on. So who needs to know when the animation is done playing? What node needs to change for the scene to actually change? This is obviously main scene, because it has the background node, it has the story script, sorry, that is currently being used, meaning that we are currently inside of SceneManager, and we need another scene, the main scene, to know when something happens inside of the SceneManager. This is a textbook situation that calls for signals. So scroll back to the top of our file, and let's create two signals. I'm going to create one signal called transition out completed that will be fired when the SceneManager is done doing the transitioning out animation. And I'm also going to create a signal called transition in completed, which will be fired when the SceneManager is done transitioning in the new scene. All right, so back to our fade out function. We need to actually fire the transition out completed signal when the animation is done. And you might be thinking, oh, that's easy. We can just, emit the transition out completed signal here after the animation, right? But actually, no, because tweens are asynchronous. So when writing this line of code here, the animation will start playing, but it would not pause the execution of our code. So anything that we write after this can be executed long before the animation is done playing. So how do we know when the animation is done playing then? What we need to do here is we need to call another method of our tween called tween callback. So if you're not a programmer and you're not familiar with the word callback, it generally refers to a function that is automatically called when another process is done. So tween callback here allows us to define what will happen after the tween is done doing the animation, which is perfect for us. So we're going to go ahead and emit our transition out completed signal when the tween is done. We can do this by creating a function here, which is our callback animation. So you're going to do function, and inside of here, we can specify what is supposed to happen after the animation is done, which is two things. We want to, actually just one thing. We want to fire our signal, transition out completed dot emit. This is all we need to do for the fade out function, actually. There we go. Now we're going to take care of the fade in, and to get you guys to practice solo a little bit, you will pause the video here and you're going to try and code the fade in function by yourself. You can look at how we did for the fade out. You need to do the exact opposite operation. You need to go from completely black to completely transparent. And I will show you the implementation right after this. So go ahead and try to do this by yourself first. All right, hopefully you were able to figure this on your own, but if not, no worries at all. You learn by making mistakes. So let's take a look together. So we're doing the exact opposite here. As I've said, the starting value of modulate A is 1, and it needs to go from 1 to 0. So you specify 0 here, and the rest is pretty much the same, with the exception of one thing. In the callback function of the tween, we need to also change the visible property of our transition rect back to false. And you might be thinking, why? Isn't the color rect transparent already? Well, yes, it is, but transparent in Godot doesn't mean the same as not being visible. So you don't want the color rect to interfere with anything in your main scene, and it's a lot safer to completely camouflage its existence with the visible property. So as you can see, fade out puts it back to true when it starts anyway, right here. So it's not a big deal to put it back to false temporarily after you're done with your animation. Now, we are going to do another homework. You're going to try and implement the slide out and the slide in function by yourself. And in this case, you'll have to animate a different property of the color rect. I've showed that in the editor earlier. You don't want to change modulate.a, but you want to change something that has to do with its positioning. So inside slide out, you want to animate the color rect so that it slides from the right side and stops when it completely covers the screen. And for the slide in, you want to animate that color rect so that it starts from where it stopped in the slide out and leaves in the same direction, which is to the left. Go ahead and try and do this now. All right, welcome back. Let's take a look. The first thing is to make sure that the color rect is actually visible and not transparent by putting modulate.a to 1. So this is the same reason why we had to reset the position at the start of the fade in and the fade out function. Make sure that the other animations didn't mess with the appearance or the position of your color rect. Now, the starting position of the color rect is the top right corner, which you can grab by using the viewport size. And this is great because it will work no matter what the size of your game window is. The Y position should be 0, like this, and the X position should be viewport size.x. We then animate the position.x property so that the color rect goes from the top right corner to the top left corner, where it was originally, and then we emit the transition out completed signal when it's done playing the animation, the same way we did for fade out. And for slide in, virtually the same thing as fade in. The starting position here is zero for both X and Y, and we want the color rect to do the same motion as the slide out in the same direction, meaning that the top left corner of the color rect will stop at minus viewport size.x. Don't forget to also put the visibility back to false when you're done animating. And that will be it for our animations. So save your file. You should not have any mistake at this point in your file, but if you have one, leave a comment. Now, if you execute your game now, you'll see that nothing has changed because we're not actually using any of the code we've written yet. No one is calling the transition in or transition out methods of the SceneManager yet. So you'll see, however, that our autoload does exist inside of our game. You can see it by clicking Remote and seeing SceneManager here. So this is the purpose of an autoload. You have your main scene, and you have your autoload floating somewhere as well inside of root. This is why we did it. This is why we did it this way. Now, I'm going to close the execution of the game. All right, now let's go ahead and actually use our animation. You're going to want to go back on mainScene.gd, and on the top, we are going to add a variable called transition effect. This will be a string, and it will default to fade like everywhere else. We are going to add another variable called dialog file, which is also a string, and by default you can simply copy paste what you had inside of the ready function here, because this corresponds to the same information. There we go. And then inside of load dialog you can simply put your dialog file. There we go. So these two new variables are the two things that we will update when transitioning from one scene to the other. If you remember at the end of the first scene.json, let me pull it back up, story first scene.json. At the end here, we have next scene and we have transition, which correspond to the two variables that we have created on the top of main scene. So these two variables are going to change at the end of a given scene. So we need main scene to listen to the two signals that SceneManager can send and act accordingly when they are emitted. So if you remember the previous parts of this tutorial, connecting the signals to their callback function also happens in the ready method here. So let's connect the signals to two methods that we have not created yet, but we will do that shortly. Right below this, you're going to do SceneManager and grab the name of your signal, transition out completed. We are going to connect this to something called on transition out completed. And same thing for the transition in completed, connect on transition in completed. So if you don't want to have the editor giving you mistakes, you can comment these add for now. Now inside of process current line, we can finally take care of the case when line has next scene. So we've done this in the previous part. We can finally specify the behavior that is supposed to have when we have next scene specified. So as I mentioned, this is where you want to update your two global variables called a dialog file and transition effect, so that the main scene knows what to do when the scene manager is done fading out the current scene. So we're going to reconstitute the name of the new dialog file like so. Next scene, and then dialog file will be resources story, or whatever folder you have put your story files in, then next scene, and then finally .json, right? So this should be the name of the next dialog file that needs to be loaded by the main scene. If you remember what we did for the second scene script, however, it's possible for the next scene here to be an empty string. And in that case, you want dialog file to be an empty string as well. Otherwise, this will have a very weird value. You know, it will have this and then nothing and then .json, which corresponds to nothing. So you're going to do this if the next scene is not empty. So this is empty, but the opposite with an exclamation mark on top. And else, just put an empty string here as well. Now, the transition effect is a little bit easier to grab because it's just line and then transition, right? But actually, not really. We're not going to access the transition property directly. We're going to do get transition, and the second input here, you can specify what value you want to have by default if the transition property does not exist in your line. And here, as always, you can put fade. So we want to do this because we want to make it optional for the writer of the script, yourself or someone else in your team, to specify the transition. So if they don't care about the type of transition between two scenes, they are allowed to only specify the name of the next scene and move on. And in that case, it will default to the fade in, fade out animation. Now finally, it's time to call the scene manager and tell it to start transitioning out the current scene. So from this point, the screen will fade to black. So it means the scene will be done and there's no need to keep processing the current line. So we will also return after doing this. So scene manager, call transition out with your transition effect. And after this, you can just return. There's no need to keep checking if it has other properties. We are done with our current scene. So at this stage, the screen is fading to black, and we need to wait until the animation is done, until we can replace the dialog lines and start the new scene. So luckily for us, we are now listening to the scene manager transition out signal. So we can implement this behavior inside of the transition out callback function, which is this one. So go back to the end of your file, create on transition out completed, I think. Forgot the name that I've given. On transition out completed, yes. So inside of this. So here we want to do virtually the same thing as what's going on inside of the ready method. We want to load the new dialog, if it exists, obviously. We're going to do dialog lines equal load dialog. So here you can specify dialog file, because at this stage it already has the new value that we've assigned at the end of our current scene. After this, you want to reset the position of your index back to 0 to make sure that you start from the beginning of your new scene. And the last thing you want to do is called SceneManager transition in with your transition effect, signaling the SceneManager to start transitioning in to the new scene, right? We can also create the on transition in completed function, and here is going to be a lot easier. The only thing we have to do is to start processing the dialogue, and you can do this simply by calling process current line. This should start by processing the first line of dialogue, because at this stage your dialogue index has been set to 0. Now let's go ahead and try our transition. I'm going to execute my game. This is, I believe, the second scene. So let me change it back to the first scene. First scene. Oh, actually, don't forget to comment out the connection of the two signals, otherwise it's not going to work. So I'm going to go to the end of this current scene. I believe this is the end of our conversation. All right, nothing happened. Why? Close your game. As you can see, we do have two mistakes. What does it say? Parent node is busy setting up children, so add child failed. And Godot is very nice because it tells us the solution. Consider using add child call deferred child instead. So what's happening here is that the SceneManager is trying to add this child to a parent node that is still busy setting up children. So most likely what's happening here is that the root is setting up the main scene, and while this is happening, we are trying to add another children, which cannot happen. So we want this line to happen after root is done preparing the main scene, and you can do this by doing, like Godot said, add child call deferred. And that should hopefully fix our issue. Let's try again. All right, I believe this is the end of our conversation. Click. All right, so that didn't look very good. Let's look at our debugger. The tween property modulate A does not exist in color rect. Let's see what's happening here. Modulate.a does not exist. That's correct. That's because it's called modulate with two dots like this. Now let's try again. Okay. So the change of background was a little bit jarring here, but no worries. We're going to address this very soon. For now, let's keep going. Going to reach the end of this conversation. Blah blah blah. I think that covers all of the new features. Let's wrap this up. And another error. Trying to assign value of type nil to a variable of type array, and that happens somewhere in the code. File does not exist. All right, so I'm sure you can tell when that is happening. That is happening inside of transition out completed. This file does not exist. So this is what I've warned you about. The dialog file at this stage will be an empty string, like we specified here, and we've forgotten to take that into consideration here when creating the transition out completed. All right, so let's fix this first. What we want to do is check if the dialog file is not empty first, and if it's not empty, we can do the thing that we've implemented here. Else, this is presumably the end of your game, so you're probably going to want to have some kind of behavior here, like going back to the title screen, but for now we are just going to print end, because this is out of scope for this specific tutorial. Now the next problem that we had is that the change of background happened after the transition was done, right? We had a fade to black, then we had a fade back into the new scene, but the background change happened after this. So why is it happening like this? So currently what's happening is that the main scene calls SceneManager transition in, at this stage, let me find it, transition out, sorry. It calls transition out, which will start the transition animation. And then this is going to trigger our transition out callback right here, which in turn is going to trigger SceneManager transition in. And when this is done, we are going to call on transition in completed, which will immediately process the current line. At this stage, the current line is location, and this is when the location will change. So obviously at that point, the fade back in is done happening, and this is why we are able to witness the change of background, right? If you want to, a little reminder, right? So it happens right after the animation. So this is obviously not really what we want. We want to actually take care of the location change while the screen is still black. It's kind of the point of the transition, right? So this is why we have on transition out completed. When this is called, the screen is black, so it's the perfect place to take care of this. So after loading your new lines of dialogue, right here, we can check what's on the first line of our new script. So just take dialogue lines with, you could put 0 here, or you could also put dialogue index because we've just put it back to 0. And we want to check if the first line, sorry, I keep making typos, if first line has something called location. And if it does, we are going to take care of the background change right here and now. We're not going to wait until the transition is done playing. So if it has a location, you want to do background dot texture equal load. And we've already done that in the previous part of this tutorial, if I remember, but you want to go ahead and fetch where your assets are. So in my case, it's going to be assets images, and inside of this I should have something called name of the location, in a PNG format. So if you have more than one format, it's going to be a bit more complex for you to handle, but in my case I only have PNGs. So this is why I can find the new file very easily. So now we have taken care of the change of background. Since this is done, we can actually go ahead and do +1 to the dialogue index, because if you don't do this, dialogue index will still be 0 after the transition is completed, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to do another background change to the same file. We don't need this to happen. We can simply go ahead and go to the second line here, process this one. So this is why I'm doing dialogue index +1. Careful. So if you have musics, this is also when you want to switch to the new music in that same location right here. I don't have them, so I don't need to do it. All right, let's try executing our game again and see if the transition happens like we want it to. I believe this is the end of our conversation. Perfect. All right, let's see if the end of the conversation triggers a mistake. Let's wrap this up. All right, fade to black, and we have the word "and." It works exactly like we want it to work. Great. Now let's do the real scene change, which is the one from the title screen to the main scene, which will require the change scene to file function of Godot, because they are two completely different scenes. So for that, we will need to create a title screen. But before we do that, actually, jump back to SceneManager very quickly to add another function here at the end, which we are going to call, as you can imagine, change scene. So this is going to be the native way of doing this in Godot. Change scene. You want to know which scene you're targeting, and this is going to be a path. It's going to be a file path if you prefer. And here you want to call getTree and change scene to file and specify your path. And that's pretty much it. This is how you usually change scenes in Godot. And it's very important that it happens inside of the scene manager in case you want to customize what's happening here. All right, so back to our editor. We are going to create a new scene called title screen to create new scene. I'm going to call this title screen. It's going to be a 2D scene as well. Here we go. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'm just going to do something that's very basic so that we can implement the scene change. So for the background, we will do the same thing as the main scene, which is a canvas layer with texture rect inside of it, right here. Texture rect will be set to full rect to cover everything. I'm going to change its texture with what I have prepared here, which is title screen. Move this inside of the texture, and that is it for a background. Now we're going to have another layer of elements with another canvas layer as a child of title screen, canvas layer 2. So inside of this layer, I want to add the title of the game in the center, and I also want to have 2 buttons. I want to have one button called New Game, and I want to have another one called Quit to exit the game. So you know the drill. If you want to center something in Godot, you can just have a center container. This center container should also be set to full rect to cover everything, because we want the children node to be at the center of the whole screen. And I want the title here and the button right below it, which calls for a VBox container to place your elements vertically. Inside of this, finally, I can have my rich text label, which will be the name of my game. I'm going to write my adventure visual novel game, maybe. There we go. Now we can't see anything, and that's because it's children of a control node with no minimum size. So we're going to change that right now. You need to come to layout. You're going to open, actually it's right here, custom minimum size. We're going to change this so that we are able to see what's going on. So something like 600 and 200. Now we can finally see it. It's right here. You'll notice that it is using the default font, which we don't want because we already have a theme that we've created in the previous part of this tutorial. So we are going to click on center container, and we're going to change the theme here so that it affects every children. So you don't want to do a new theme. You're going to do quick load and select the theme that we already have. There we go. Now it has the font that we have already defined for the other rich text label nodes of our game. The title is still way too small though, so I'm going to make it a little bit bigger and a little bit better looking by overriding some attributes in the theme override section. So you don't have to do exactly the same thing as I do, but you can just follow me if you don't have something that you've already planned for the visual of your title screen. All right, so come over to theme overrides, and the first thing I'm going to change is the normal font size. I'm going to put something like, I think 50 pixel will do the trick. I'm also going to open constants. I want to have some outline. I'm going to put 10 here to have a black outline. I'm going to slightly change the shadow offset as well with 5 and 5. I want to change the color of my shadow to actually black. Black is fine. That will work just well. And I think that will be everything. The last thing I want to do is scroll back up here, and you want to make sure that you check the horizontal. You want to change this to center, actually, both of them, to have the label node centered on itself as well. All right, so that will do. Now we are going to add another VBox container for the 2 buttons that we want to have. We don't want this as a child of the label, but on the same level, something like this. Right, now create a button inside. I'm going to call this new game. As you can see, it already has the look that we want it to have because it is affected by the theme defined for center container. Let me rename this to new game button. It's a little bit too big for me, so I'm actually going to change the custom minimum size. I want to put 200 here. You can see that it didn't change anything because by default, the button will try and take the entirety of the space available of the container. So as you can see here, we have a VBox container, which is that big. It's affected by the text label. So the VBox container is taking the width that it's supposed to have to handle that label, and then in turn the button is taking all of the space available. But I don't want that to happen. I want to have a specific size for the button. So something like, actually 200, maybe it's a little bit small. Perhaps 400 will do the trick. And now that it's done, you want to duplicate this by pressing Ctrl D. I'm going to call this quit button and write quit. So as you can see, they are a little bit close to each other, and we can change that by overriding the constant of our VBox container to something like, I don't know, maybe 10 will do, or 20. This is pretty much up to you. I think I like 20, and I also want more distance between the title and the buttons. So this is this VBox container. We are also going to override and put something like, maybe 50 is nice. Maybe even 80 to take up more space. I like it this way. All right, that will be our title screen for now. Feel free to change it as you want. I just want to show you how to do a scene change. So that will be enough for me. Now we are going to attach a script to our new scene. We're going to call this title screen.gd. That's fine, but you don't want this in the scene folder. You want this in the script folder. Open, create. Here we go. So we want two things. We want to implement the behavior that is supposed to happen when the player clicks on new game, and what is supposed to happen when the player clicks on quit, right? So we need to access those two buttons here. We can do this by first assigning a unique name to them, or making them accessible as unique names, sorry. And as always, on ready, new game button, which is a button. Then you can drag and drop this. And you want to do the same with the other. On ready var quit button, also a button. And same, you can drag and drop this. Now, in the ready function, what do we need to do when that scene is ready? Well, obviously we want to know when the player clicks on any of the buttons, right? So we want to connect their signals, specifically the pressed signal, to two functions that we will create very soon. On new game button pressed, and same for the quit button pressed, connect on quit button pressed. So when the player clicks on the new game button, we want the game to start, which involves changing scenes. And in order to change scenes, we need to start with a fade out animation, and this happens with the SceneManager. So we also need the SceneManager transition out completed signal to be recognized by our title screen, and we're going to connect this to something called on transition out completed, the same as the main scene. So we haven't created any of those yet, but we will do this now. So the first thing we will do is the new game. Let's start with the new game. On new game button pressed. So at this stage, the player has clicked on the new game button. So what do we need to do? We need to change scenes, but that happens with a transition first. This is when you want to call transition out to transition out of the current scene. Then we need to know when that transition is done happening, and that is done happening when this callback function is called on transition out completed. So this is when you actually want to change scenes, and you can do this with SceneManager and then our new function change scene, and then you specify where you want to go. So here we want to go to the main scene, which is located in scenes, and it should be called main scene. If it's called something else for you, be sure to write the correct name here. So at this stage we have transitioned to well, we will transition to the new scene. Now right before we keep going, let's implement the last one. On, quit, button pressed. What needs to happen here? We need to quit the game. That can be done very easily by doing git tree and then quit. All right. Is this everything? Well, not really. You may have noticed that we haven't really taken care of the transitioning in animation, right? We didn't call SceneManager transition in, and we also don't know when it's done transitioning in. And there's a reason for that. It's because when we transition in, this node, the title screen, doesn't exist anymore because we have effectively changed scene. What exists is main scene. So the transition in needs to happen inside of main scene. And when main scene is created, or should I say when main scene is ready, the ready function will be called. So this is where you want to actually have the transition in animation. Where should you do it? We can just do it at the end when we have connected everything here. And we can just actually replace process current line with SceneManager transition in, because it will do the same thing. When we transition in, it will eventually call the transition in completed callback function, which is at the bottom. And as you can see, it does process current line. So this is virtually the same thing, except that we do the proper transition before this scene starts. Now, there's one other thing that we need to do. So look at this line of code here. We don't really want title screen to keep listening to this event more than once, because every other time the transition out completed signal is emitted by the SceneManager, it will be aimed as the main scene to change the store scripts and not title screen. So luckily Godot allows us to code this behavior by adding a second input here. And I'm going to add connect one shot. So what that means here is that the callback, this one, will be called only once and then never again. So you technically do not really need to do this because the title screen scene will be deleted after changing scene to the main scene. So in theory, it cannot listen to the transition out completed signal again because it won't exist. But it's better to be safe than sorry. And it also allows me to show you that the signal connection method has in fact a second input, not just this one. It has a bunch actually. If you look at this, actually I can just click here. And you can see we have a bunch of them here. Connect deferred, persist, one shot, reference counted. You can read the documentation if you want to know a little bit more. But for us, this is the one that we want to use, which means only call this callback once and then just forget about this connection. So now, before we execute our game, we are going to go in the project settings. You want to go in general and then run. And you want to change this to your title screen scene because I want my game to start with the title screen. Now, you don't really have to do this. If you want to keep the main scene as the first thing you see when you execute your game, here you can. But then you will have to click on another button to execute the title screen. I'm going to show you very soon. Let me select title screen, close. So here. Now, if I click on this button, it will execute the game. And for me, that's my title screen. But for you, if you keep main scene, you want to actually click on this one, which is run current scene. So this will run whatever scene you are currently looking at right now. And this is usually how you want to debug your game. You don't want to start from the beginning every time. You want to start from the current scene and see if everything works as you want. So let's execute our game. Now, if I click on quit, it quits our game. That's all good. And if I click on new game, fade out, fade in. All right. Okay. Now, two things that we can try doing. Actually, one thing that we can try doing is test our second animation. So you're going to go on maybe the first scene and do a slide animation instead and see how that works. So this time I'm going to start with main scene and run the current scene. And it looks very strange. Why is that? Oh, this is because I'm actually looking at the character scene. So click on main scene, run current scene. All right, you saw something strange happen, right? You saw that when I execute, I start by seeing whatever I have defined on my editor, and then when the fade in animation is done, it actually starts the dialogue like it should. Right? That's not good. We don't really want that. We want this window to be kind of like empty up until it starts processing the first line of dialogue, and we are going to fix that very soon, right after I check if the slide animation works. Great, perfect. It should be working for you as well, hopefully. If it doesn't, you know the drill. Go in the comments. So now, let's fix this weird behavior that we have here. Actually, you should also see it if you start from the title screen. If I do this, new game, you can see that weird transition thing. Like it changes from what I have defined here to the actual data that is written inside of our dialogue. So in order to kind of like just like, you know, empty out this screen here, you can go back to the code. First thing first, we are going to open the script for dialog UI, and inside of dialog UI, inside of the ready function, we want to make sure that the display is reset. So same as choicelist.hide, sorry, we also want to kind of like delete all the stuff that we have defined in the editor. So just put nothing inside of the text, and also put nothing inside of the speaker name. Just kind of like start on something that's a bit more, you know, nicer to look at. So after doing this, it should be that text box at least is empty, but we still have the character sprite. So open character sprite next. When it's ready, we are going to make it invisible. You can do this with self-modulate.a and put this to 0. So if you do this and then execute your game, there's no character sprite, and it never appears because it stays transparent until you change that, right? So we are going to what we are going to do is just like fade in the character sprite very quickly when the conversation starts. So we know the conversation starts when we are calling change character. Whenever the process current line is calling change character, we are currently handling a conversation, and this is when we can fade in the character sprites when we need to. So just at the end of this function here, check if if we can check if it's still transparent. So if modulate A is still 0, we're going to very quickly animate it back to 1, and you can do this by creating a twin, and then immediately we're going to call tween property. This is self this time. We are changing the modulate A property. We want it back to 1, and we want to do this quite quickly, so let's do like 0.3 seconds, for example. Now let's try that. All right, looks much better. So that works if you execute from the title screen. It should also work if you start from the main scene, as you can see. So that's much better. We start by getting rid of all this. So you can play with this as you want. You can change the text, you can change the speaker name. This is for your debugging purposes, but it should not affect your game. So this is why it's important to reset your display once you reach this stage of the implementation of your game. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. Thank you for following this tutorial. As I've said, it might be the last one for a while, but you know, looking forward to hear your feedback and hear what you want to see implemented next whenever that happens. All right, I'll see you soon.